Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Excellent. Let's move on. I assume that the first page of our webinar series is up. It says Capitalizing Recovery, Identifying and Building Recovery Capital. Clearly, for me, if you've been around me enough, you know that I believe that we best teach what we most need to learn. And the concept of recovery capital is something that I've had to learn in order to be able to teach it. I can recall that several of the initial Recovery Coach Academies that I did with Phil Valentine, and when even the concept or the words of recovery capital came up, I tended to defer to Phil. However, in my efforts to help support recovery coach performance through the CCAR system at this point, I am much, much more aware of what's helpful for us to think about and to know as we think about recovery capital and its importance in helping recovery planning as well as the process of recovery. Let's move on and see what we're going to be doing for this next hour. In talking about capitalizing recovery, identifying and building recovery capital, over the next hour, we're going to look at a description of recovery capital. We're going to look at the three types of recovery capital. We're going to identify how recovery capital affects addiction remission, which may also be called the concept of recovery. We're going to look at ways of assessing recovery capital, and that's very important. We're going to a concept that came through loud and clear to me is that recovery capital informs recovery planning, and I would hope that you'll be able to see that as we move on. Then we'll talk about action steps and review the session and a closing. And clearly over the course of this, I'm very much open to hearing what you are learning, what you know, so this could be very collaborative, I hope. So are we ready to move on? Or are there any questions on what we're going to be doing over the next hour? Can we move on? Excellent. Let's move on. Let's review the recovery coach roles. A recovery coach is a personal guide and a mentor. A recovery coach is a lifestyle consultant, a truth teller, a resource broker, an ally and a confidant, a problem solver, an advocate, a motivator and a cheerleader, and a community organizer. And you've seen this when we've talked about the roles and responsibilities of recovery coaches in Recovery Coach Academy and beyond. And the bolded one at the end is one that really clearly is a process of all of those roles that you see and comes into play as we help recoveries identify their pathway as well as identify plans to travel that pathway. So we also assist recoveries in identifying and building recovery capital. Any questions on this slide? Any comments on this slide? Okay, I'm going to move on. The focus. I would like your response at this point in our journey within this particular training. As best as you know, and please trust yourselves, what is recovery capital? And more importantly, as you think about what is recovery capital, and in an effort to keep it simple, how do you describe recovery capital to a recovery? So I want to take a shot at these two questions. What is recovery capital? More importantly, how do you describe recovery capital to a recovery? I see Blair is typing. Blair says recovery capital is understanding, identifying internal resources and external supports. Thank you, Blair. I see Mary and Beth are typing. Let's see what they're offering us. Tools to maintain healthy living. I like that, Mary. Understanding, identifying internal resources and external supports, which can be translated to tools to maintain healthy living. Well stated on both ends. Beth says, I define it to recoveries as anything that will help you to stay clean and live a good quality life. I like that. Nice and simple. More from Beth. I've got both Beth and Fel at work at this point, so let's see what are the additional offerings. Fel speaks about personal resources. Fel states personal resources that can be leveraged on behalf of your recovery path. I like that word leverage because it really ties in to this whole concept of capital. Um, Yoli, your relationships within the community and how it will enhance your recovery is another critical part of recovery capital. Beth states it's like collecting small stones of positivity to keep in your pocket and use at a later day when you may be struggling. Wow, that is so powerful and potent. Because I really think about recovery capital are the things that help to build who I am as I move through this process. And clearly the ability to have some so-called extra change or small stones in one's pocket is a critical part of the process because you never know when you're going to need it. Well done. Can I move on? I've liked the way you've offered this. It's simple, um, and please collaborate in this learning experience with me. Granfield and Cloud, who have been the most potent contributors to my understanding of recovery capital, say that recovery capital is the volume of internal and external assets that can be brought to bear to initiate and sustain recovery from alcohol and other drug problems. They also state that recovery capital, or broadening the concept to recovery capacity, differs from individual to individual and differs within the same individual at multiple points in time. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And how do you experience these descriptions of recovery capital? The internal and external assets that can be brought to bear to initiate and sustain recovery, and it's different from individual to individual, and it may differ within the same individual at multiple points in time, especially make an effort to tease that concept of how might it differ from individual to individual at multiple points in time. I got that typing. While Beth is typing, I was really intrigued by the concept of recovery capacity. Think about that concept, my capacity to what in relation to recovery? My capacity, how does that resonate with you thinking about recovery capacity as a concept that we thought about in relation to recovery capital? It's different for each individual. I've got Blair and Beth typing. Beth absolutely agrees that people are motivated by different things, both internal and external, and degrees of motivation vary at different points in time. She also feels like this is tied to a person's mental health, moods, and current needs. Thank you, Beth. Blair states that sounds all about skills to me, literally active learning of those skills and how to use them in a variety of circumstances. I'm right there with you, Blair. Again, folks, I believe that, one of the four laws of change says that a great learning must occur. And that taps directly into how Blair is saying learning of skills, learning of abilities, learning of techniques that address both our internal as well as our external needs. And then not only the ability to learn those skills, as Blair helps us to hear, but how do we apply them to the variety of circumstances? I think that's right on the money when we're talking about recovery capital and its potency in its ability to enhance and support and sustain and maintain, as well as plan a process of recovering. I've got both Beth and Michael offering some information at this point. Let's see what we're getting. And for those that I didn't say good morning to earlier, welcome and thanks for joining us. I see we're really moving up and this is exciting, folks. This is really good stuff. Michael states as one builds recovery capital, a stronger recovery is established at certain times with regards to spiritual and emotional growth. Clearly, Michael, thank you. And again, building is the concept here. Phil Valentine, constantly resonates in my head. Transform people. Built people build people. So the ability to build recovery is the ability to build recovery capital and understand how to utilize it. As far as recovery capacity, Beth says, I'm a true hope hustler and often find myself pushing the fact that recovery can, will, and does happen. With that said, any person also gets to decide what being in recovery means to them. Exactly, and they get to identify what parts of capital help that process. I've got Beth typing. Once this comes through, I hope we can move on to the next page so that we can cover all of our material. Thank you, Beth. I got you. Spelling doesn't count, folks. Spelling doesn't count. Let's move on. Granfield and McLeod state that recovery capital or recovery capacity interacts with an individual's problem severity to shape the intensity and duration of supports needed to achieve recovery, interacts with the person's problem severity, problem issues, and help shape the intensity and duration of the supports that would be needed to achieve recovery. This interaction dictates the intensity or level of care an individual needs in terms of professional treatment, and this interaction also dictates the intensity and duration of post-treatment recovery support services. Make that simple for me in your minds, if you would, please. What are those three bullets saying to you? How would you summarize those three bullets related to recovery capital and recovery capacity? Blair states, what do I need? How do I get it? And for how long? Well stated. Well stated. What do I need? Given where I am in my recovery at this point, where I am in my recovery at this moment, and the severity of the issues that are looking to be addressed within that recovery. What do I need? How do I get it? And for how long? 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time, many times. Well stated, Mary. The reminder. Bell states, highlights the idea that recovery is unique to each individual. That's why we meet individuals in recoveries where they're at. That's why it's about the recovery. It's not about me. As they go through their day-to-day lives, they have the capacity and the ability to identify what their challenges are, what their stressors are. And again, I identify the difference between a challenge and a stress. I am challenged with problems living in my recovery if I experience myself as having both the external and the internal resources to be able to bring to bear to address that problem in living. And I am stressed when I either don't have either one of those or both of those. So it really highlights the idea that for each individual, that's different. And that the difference really comes about when we talk about those internal stressors and pressures and problem severity issues that can be addressed. Let's move on to the next slide. What are the three types of recovery capital? And again, trusting yourselves, knowing what you know, what are the three types of recovery capital as you understand or are seeking to understand? Anybody got that? Three types of recovery capital. Now, I agree with the idea that there are external and internal resources that are brought to bear to help individuals address their recovery issues and recovery pathway and recovery travels. So what are the three types of recovery capital that might be brought to bear to help people on their journey? Want me to move on? Or someone have here? Blair is typing. Michael's typing. Blair identifies types of recovery capitals: practical, spiritual, and institutional. Thank you, Blair. Michael says individual, community, and family. Obviously, Michael sat in on the this recovery coach performance support meeting that we had because it is building individual, family, and community capacity as well as for recovery. Let's move on and look at that. How recovery capital helps. White and Cloud say, recovery capital is a concept linked to natural recovery, solution focus and strength-based helping, recovery management, resilience and protective factors, and the ideas of hardiness, wellness, and global health. There are three types of recovery capital that can be influenced by addiction professionals. We as recovery coaches have the opportunity and the ability to help recoverees identify and be influenced by their recovery capital processes and resources. How's your recovery capital is a diagram that I use, as well as an assessment tool that I use to help people to think about recovery capital. The three types of recovery capital are listed here: personal recovery capital, family and social recovery capital, and community recovery capital. These are the resources that we believe that stabilize and sustain a recovery's recovery. This is a tool that I use and put into recovery's hands and offers an additional an a upfront initial assessment of the recovery capital. If you look at it, it keeps it real simple. There are other assessments that will offer an opportunity to look at in more depth and greater detail. However, when you look at personal recovery capital, think about things like employment, housing, clothing and food, transportation, physical health, health insurance, financial assets, education, vocational skills, values, vitality, and spirituality. You mentioned spirituality, Blair, in your verbalization of the recovery capital. It is a part of the personal recovery capital journey. Under family and social recovery capital, it speaks to those struggles that I certainly had in my own recovery process, maintaining close family relationships. It's the breadth of social relationships, which were also a challenge. It's the presence of others in recovery. It's recovery-friendly activities. It's recovery-friendly institutions, much like CCAR and recovery support networks. And community recovery capital speaks to what are the attitudes of the community in relation to addiction and recovery, what are the policies related to addiction, how do we access, is the access to recovery resources, the efforts to reduce stigma, public health, public safety. I'm not sure what CJUS is. I am so sorry, folks. Quality of life issues, understanding of addiction, and economic development. Do these three um, forms of recovery capital make sense to you? Can you see the value of sharing this information with recoverees, with the heading be, how is your recovery capital? And how do you see this coming into play as we help people along their path and their journey? Any thoughts on these three recovery capital types and components and what you're seeing on this particular slide? Love it. Multiple attendees are typing. That's what we have, folks. Nothing better than collaborative learning. Nothing better than learning, doing, and teaching from each other and with each other. Blair states it gets them out of their own heads, looking around to literally build a network, grow understanding, and seek support from outside. Yeah, yeah. Kathy states it's personal assets that are also a key part of personal recovery capital. I was surprised also, Kathy, when I said that personal recovery capital, especially related to issues of values, vitality, and spirituality, which gets teased out in other settings. Thank you, Phil. Criminal justice, FYI. Appreciate it. Welcome. Good morning, my friend. Personal assets. Excellent. Those personal assets are critical, especially when we talk about recovery coaching and recovery being an empowerment and strength building enterprise. Michael states it covers. Let's capture that, Michael. As one builds recovery capital, Michael says, a stronger recovery is established at certain times with regards to their spiritual and emotional growth. Clearly, so much of our spiritual and emotional growth are our connections with other people outside of ourselves, as well as our ability to connect with and treasure and value who we are. And the concept, Michael, of as one builds recovery capital demonstrates the power of the process. It is so much an opportunity to learn and grow and do and teach and learn and grow and do and teach. Yes, Kathy. Building on existing personal assets is a good way to initiate the process. It empowers the recovery. And Mary, it does, I agree with you, it begins with honesty, openness, and willingness. And I think the capacity to help people to be more honest, more open, and more willing to develop and practice a way of living that enhances their ability to be healthy as well as recover and strengthen themselves is so much based on people getting a clearer understanding of what might help that process. Let's move to the next page, next slide, if we might. Focus question, and again, I welcome your comments and thoughts. How does recovery capital, given what we're understanding about it at this point, affect addiction remission? We could slash that as recovery. How does recovery capital affect the ability to cause remission in the addiction severity and the addiction problems in living? And how does recovery capital affect recovery? More recovery capital, more recovery. Well stated, Beth. And especially in the context of more recovery capitals related to more problems and more problem severity. The more of the problems in living that I'm experiencing, the more severe they are, the more recovery capital will come to bear, which offers an opportunity to put portions of that addiction into remission. Any other thoughts about how recovery capital affects recovery? How recovery capital affects addiction remission? Looking for Blair's offering as he's typing now. Blair states it helps us to look outside in the way our communities either support and or ignore the needs of recovery. Well stated. I mean, initially when I looked at recovery capital, I expected it to be the individual and the family, but then the community capacity for recovery is what I hear you saying in your statement, Blair, which is very critical. And that's where the advocacy roles come in for us as recovery coaches. Growing that understanding, growing that diminishment of stigma, growing that acceptance that people do recover, growing an awareness of putting a face on recovery as a way of helping the community to be more helpful and offering opportunities for the process to occur. Healthy seeds do not grow in diseased soil. So no matter how much a person may bring to bear their own internal recovery assets, if we've not affected their families or their communities or their relationships, then the disease continued to foster and grow. It's much like the white bison groups does when they look at the forest and the trees. If you look at the roots that the trees that the white bison group helps us to look at, they're encased in the problems in living that many people are addressing as they try to come to recovery. So community awareness, understanding, and growth is critical to the process as well. Can we move on? Or are there other thoughts or questions about this question or this piece, this focus? As the trainer, I get to interpret your silence, so we are moving on. This is just a diagram that I found. I love to Google concepts that I'm thinking about. And this one came up when looking at recovery capital. You see, in related to substance abuse related problems, the higher those go, the greater is the addiction severity. The more substance abuse related problems I have, the more severe my addiction is. With addiction remission, as the remission of my addiction expands, you see that's a result of recovery capital expanding. I think people have verbalized that in talking about what you talked about earlier. Any thoughts, questions, or comments on this, or does this make sense for you? Simple enough. Great to hear, Beth. When I Google images, it's an effort to keep it simple, primarily for myself, because I don't want to overcomplicate these issues, and clearly I want to be able to verbalize it. And I'm working on a piece now where I suggest to people to image in, and it's a play on the words of imagine. And as you see these figures and these images, appreciate the power that they may have in putting this in front of a recovery to help them to understand the concepts that we want to keep it simple for them in the ability to sustain and maintain their process of recovery. So with that in mind, we look at the similar diagram, and it says substance-related problems. What are the effects of addiction on my wellness, my well-being, and my quality of life? Tended to be those substance-related problems that I experienced. And then the concept is, what is addiction remission in that same concept? Can you see the ties between us? It's helpful for people in our asking good questions and our actively listening to help them to tease out what have been the effects of their relationship with substances. And in that same process, how do they see those effects going into remission? What are the internal and external resources that I may bring to bear to begin to initiate a process of putting this addiction into remission? I think the key elements are focusing on wellness, as we do in the Wellness Recovery Plan, focusing on well-being and quality of life. If you look at occupational science and occupational helping in the context of the occupational science theory, clearly, well-being and quality of life affect the person's ability to both participate in life as well as have some semblance of improved performance in living. Any thoughts or questions about this diagram? And a question that comes from me under addiction remission, as we help recoveries along their path, how can we help them to identify that the problems in living that have impacted their life in addiction, how those may be coming into remission as they are following through on their own recovery plans, as they're having conversations that matter with you about what's going on relative to their process. Any thoughts or any questions about this particular image as you image in? We've got a response coming through from Val. The more severe your situation, Fel says, spell says, the less you may be able to identify your resources or capital. Yes, 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 yes. Anybody want to, talk to me about that? The more severe your situation, the less you may be able to identify. For some reason, that I can't see the forest for the trees comes into mind for me. Uh, for some reason, I didn't know what I didn't know about what I was doing and how I was doing it because I was so much in the midst of it. And the severity of my issues and problems had to be called to my attention at one point by my 7-year-old nephew who told me, Uncle Art, when you drink, you stink. So clearly the severity of the issues, and a lot of it has to do with denial. Don't even notice I am limited by the relationship that I'm having with um, the substance. Kathy has an offering coming up. Severity also includes addictive thinking and behaviors, even when the substance is removed. Thank you so much for the reminder, Kathy. It's so much of what really speaks to the process. My thinking, my behaviors have to become in line with a healthier and more helpful and empowered way of living and practicing quality of life. And clearly that thinking can go on for years and has to be addressed. And that speaks to the personal capital piece in relation to values and belief systems, but also how I approach my daily living and how do I function functionally in a world that isn't always one that receives my needs well. Any other comments on this, or can we move on? Enjoying it, folks. Well, good job. This is really appreciated what I'm hearing and learning and thinking. Substance-related problems. How do we push the envelope towards remission in the addiction process? How do you help addiction remission with recoveries? How do you assess the recoveries of recovery capital? Does anyone have an opportunity to do that? Are you curious about how to do that? What have been some of the resources you may have brought to bear if you've identified this concept or been thinking about this concept? Ask good questions. Right on it, Phil. And many times I ask those good questions related to that image we saw earlier, where it demonstrated the three types of recovery capital with the different parts of that. And many times I put that in front of, as we're having conversations that matter, I'm asking good questions, I'm actively listening. I'm also asking recoveries to help me to think about on that list, what are their most important needs that to be addressed. Any other thoughts about how we assess an individual's recovery capital? Ask good questions. I sometimes use a list and have them talk about items from the list that sparks things that they may not have thought of. Me too, Beth. That's a very powerful way. Again, it's about the recovery. It's not about me. It's about them having information and resources that help them to think about what they may not have thought about before. Even before I've had the privilege of engaging participants and people both in the Recovery Coach Academy as well as the efforts to enhance performance. I've always been mindful of the importance of having people think about things in a way they may not have thought about them before. And clearly when you're thinking about recovery, when you're thinking about recovery remission, it's about helping people to make connections to information, resources, and ideas that have not been a part of their thinking as a result of being so encumbered by and so involved with the process of addiction and the concerns and fears and being able to move beyond that process. Any other thoughts on this question? How do you assess an individual's recovery capital? Let me move on. That same diagram that I just verbalized. How can we help you with your recovery today is a sign in each one of the three CCAR recovery community centers. When I see that sign, I see this diagram. I see how can we help you with your recovery today. They may come and say, I don't know. This is an opportunity to know more about what that might look like. And this really connects with what Beth had stated earlier, using a list. I use this list and allow recoveries to explore it, talk about it. I actually listen to their concepts and what they're thinking, and at some point help them to think through this. Got Beth typing. Sidebar question. Will we get a copy of these slides after the seminar? I assume so, but Stacy, verify that for me if you would, please. Thank you, Stacy. I like that. Too cool, folks. Too cool. This is another way to assess recovery capital. It's got more specificity to it, and it offers the recovery to identify, to do a self-inventory of their own resources, and it really falls in line with the diagram you just saw. And take a look at it and think about it in the context of, I'm going to take you a page forward just to let you see that all of it is included. Again, if you know me, it's giving people an opportunity to rank these and inventory these. And again, their ability to do that gets them to think about it in a different way. What do you think about this particular assessment tool? I've got both Blair and Beth typing at this point. Yes. Blair is partial to the sense of meaning and purpose in life. Beth says she created something similar that I use with recoveries, but I like this one better. It's a bit more simplified than mine. I like the fact we're on the same link, folks. I like this collaborative learning because it's about not reinventing the wheel and sharing what we've learned and offering each other an opportunity to see what we're doing. And I like it as well. I mean, think about human recovery capital, which is a part of the physical recovery capital. Values, knowledge, education, vocational skills, problem-solving capacity, self-awareness, self-esteem, self-efficacy, i.e. the ability to be effective in living, a sense of meaning and purpose in living, interpersonal skills, hopefulness, optimism, perception of one's past and present future. You can see how it gives a little bit more detail versus the first, how can we help you with your recovery today, image that we saw. If I go to the next page, just to give its full breadth, family and social, intimate relationships and the like, community relationships. Again, a little bit more detail here, and it gives an opportunity for recoveries to really get a sense of what they are looking for and looking at as they move along this journey. And clearly it offers an opportunity to see that both from a physical and an internal aspect in their personal selves and expanding out into their family and social and community selves. Again, Beth, thanks for the endorsement. of liking what you see and having, I think we're all creating some really powerful stuff. And I also see the webinar as an opportunity for us to share some of the powerful resources that we are offering to recoveries and to recovery communities. We've got Bell typing. Again, as Phil is typing, I'll go back and forth and just let you absorb. And again, as Stacy said, you will have access to these. These concepts can be so new for the recovery in their early past, Phil writes. Just exploring the idea behind these concepts can be so powerful for them to identify that indeed there is a whole other world beyond and above addiction. Yes, if a recovery doesn't know what they don't know, it is so difficult, if not impossible, for them to be a solution in their own recovery process. I agree with you, Phil. So much of this work is offering recoveries an opportunity to see the path, to see the journey, to appreciate what recovery looks like, to see the occupations and acts that they can participate in to move recovery along one day at a time. I agree with you wholeheartedly, my friend. Final piece, how does recovery capital inform the recovery planning? Think about that. How does, given what we've learned, and before we move into some wrapping up of this, how do you see what we are thinking about and talking about relative to what recovery capital is, how recovery capital helps recoveries to explore and discover and uncover? So how does this recovery capital stuff inform recovery planning? For me, that's the critical issue here. When I looked at the voices and faces of recovery, this is the concept that they offered me that really resonated in my soul. So it'll be interesting to see how you're thinking about it. It can give form to the efforts. Yes. It can offer a framework. It can give form to their efforts. It helps them to see what the efforts can look like. I agree, Val. Beth is typing. It can give form to the efforts. It offers the framework. Form to the efforts just jumps into my head. 4 laws of change. It must be preceded by a great vision. Form to the effort speaks to offering it a vision to me. Kathy's typing. Beth's typing. How does recovery capital inform recovery planning? Beth writes, logistically, It's a good thing to address before or while doing the recovery wellness plan with the recovery. Recovery capital can be a framework for goal setting. Yes, I agree. Beth states at least it's a place to start. Yes, it's a place to start. From a coaching perspective, Kathy writes, it assists in meeting the person where they're at. Clearly, clearly, clearly. They get to look at what recovery looks like. They get to look at what would be helpful to add to their recovery process. They get to identify and prioritize what they are identifying as what's important to their own personal recovery process. And it's a clear way to meet recoveries where they're at, which is what recovery planning is so much about. If we don't offer these options and this information, its ability to think about what recovery capital is and what it has to offer, we do a disservice and put ourselves in a position to either treat the recovery like a recipient of our ideas or an object of our mandate that this is what you need to do. The ability to treat recoveries as a resource in this recovery planning process is to offer recoveries the options and the information so that they can challenge themselves to identify what their process looks like. And as Beth says, that offers hope. It gives them their control back. Whenever I see the word control, I substitute it for care. It gives their ability to care back. Third steps of the program speaks also, recovery program speaks about making decisions to turn our will and our lives over to care of God as we understood God. And I challenge recoveries to make a decision to turn their lives over to care. It may not be your fault that you are not well, but it is your responsibility to get better. Well stated. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left in our process, and thank you so much, folks, for what you've shared so far. Questions or comments related to anything that we've talked about, looked at, thought about, or even what you may have come in with and may not have been answered or responded to in a way that you want more information. Let's open it up for questions or comments. Got Blair typing. Questions, thoughts, comments, needs. These concepts and the application of the resource assessments offer such a powerful tool to the recovery for sure, but also to the coach. Expand on that, Blair. How do you see it as being helpful for us as coaches? Thank you, sir. As we get to know what the recovery perceives as his or her recovery capital supports capacity, we can better serve as guides. Yes, yes, yes. It offers a greater opportunity to meet them where they're at because they're giving us more information about where they're at. It offers us not the need to assume. I like that, but thank you. I've got Phil typing at this point. And please, folks, ask for what you need. Share what you're learning. Um, Let us know what you're thinking. I've got both Bell and Blair writing at this point. As we get to know what the recovery perceives as their capital, supports, and capacity, we're better helpers. We're better guides. We're better resource brokers. Blair asks, Beth, do you find that your recoveries are surprised by what they have at their disposal? Great question. Bell writes, if I cannot see the forest for the trees, it's helpful to have someone by my side to point out the landscape. I like that, Phil, because I'm working on a piece right now in relation to that piece I spoke about earlier, image in. And the first image I use is we can't see the forest for the trees. It's critical that we image in. It's critical that we focus in. We can't see the forest for the trees. Somebody else can help me. See what I don't see. And I've had lots of those challenges in my own process. If I don't know what I don't know, it's hard to be a part of my own solution. Thank goodness I've got people to coach me through this process. Got a couple of people, Beth states, Blair, I do. People just don't know what they don't know. Yes. And that speaks to the power and necessity of close-knit communities. That speaks, yes. Thank Flattered, Beth, flattered big time. And uh, anything else, folks? Power and the necessity of close-knit communities, close-knit families. It speaks to the fact that we need each other, folks. And I think recovery coaching and recovery coaches in our ability to collaborate in this learning and our ability to share what we're learning and our ability to impact communities and our ability to advocate the big A and the small A is an opportunity for us to bring communities closer together, bring families more and communities and agencies to be more responsive to what is critical in this process, that people get what they need when they need it as they identify those needs. Got Phil typing? I've got Beth and Phil typing. I hear a round of applause. Oh, thank you, Phil. Thank you so much. This is fun. It's amazing. Thank you, Beth. Big smile. Um, any other questions or thoughts, folks? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Phil. I'm especially loving it, the fact that I'm making connections with people names that I recognize. And this is such a wonderful opportunity for us to continue to collaborate and share what we're learning and take what we're learning and putting it into the world. You know, my process is, and I encourage yours to be as well, is that we learn, we live it, and then we lead it. We learn, we do, we teach. And I hope this has been helpful. Soon, I hope that. How we doing, Stacy? We're all set in mind. I look forward to it as well, Beth. Please pass the word. I think this is an exciting opportunity for us all to share what we're learning and to move and help. Stacy, great, 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 great. Anything you need from me, Stacy, to help that process, let me know. Thank you, Stacy. As always, you are my rock. You make this so easy. Thank you so much. And thank you, folks. I mean, this is a tremendous, this is going to boost my spirits to the point that that's let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Enjoy your day, folks, and thank you. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's Stacy. That's Stacy. Oh gosh. I haven't even tried to get out yet, Beth, and I'm not even going to try. Thanks to Stacy, I was able to do this from home. Thank you, folks. Thank you so much, and be well and lead life well. And we'll connect again soon, I hope. Bye bye.